So last week, one of the last questions I asked you was, what are the top stories on your YouTube channel called February Morning? By the way, let me, while I'm talking, I'm not the most skilled multitasker in the world, but I want to put a link to your YouTube channel here in the chat. And if you click
and
that,
let me
everybody,
and
you can
and
go
let
see
me
it.
show
It's in Russian.
let me show you something
Sure.
interesting, because I never actually showed you how this whole thing works.
Oh, great.
So it's a small guided tour.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's here is part of our editors group. It's
okay, behind
here.
you. Great.
Yes. Altogether, there are right now around 70 guys working with us, but
No kidding.
out of them, 30 are in Russia, and some 15 work remotely, and the rest are here. So let me go to the studio. So it's dark, but I can speak loudly there because the show is going on. But I will show you.
It's a studio, so. It's a studio. It looks like any other TV news studio. So, Ilya, I'm guessing you have to go back and, there's more to show? Okay.
I'm stepping out to show that we are in the center of Kiev. And that's how it looks like. It's where we're making our news broadcasts from here. So it's a nice weather now. We are right next to Krishchatik Street, which is the center street of Kiev. But the building, which is right next there, is the center of security forces in Kiev. So from one side, we are in the guarded and protected block of the city. From another side, we are always being threatened with missiles here. So
Yes.
let me go back to my seat, and we'll continue.
I'm gonna keep talking while you're walking. I'm assuming that's okay. They can't hear us in the studio. This is really great that you showed us this, because it helps us understand what's going on there and what you're doing. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I just put a link to the YouTube channel. It's in Russian, so just be prepared for that. What is also available is a news feed on Telegram, and I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. If you go to the news feed on Telegram, one of the things you can do is you can actually translate the news feed into English or other languages if you prefer. So that's a really great source of news about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and frankly around the world relative to the invasion. And those links are there. So feel free to use them, and I'll post them again at the end of the show so you can get them. I guess one of the things I want to ask, Ilya, is none of this existed on February 24th, right? This studio, you weren't doing, you had another life.
Absolutely. I was working mainly in business, so I kept obviously my engagement in politics, but my bet was that the changes in Russia would not happen for another 5 to 10 years. And that during that time, we basically need to make a financial foundation for the future activities for our opposition groups. And that's what I was focused on. That's why I was doing my investment business. We were, with several of my friends, we were the pioneers in what now is so well known in the West as SPACs. Special purpose acquisition companies, which was an alternative IPO investments. I created the first publicly traded company in Ukraine, which has been traded on NASDAQ. I'm very proud of that. Actually, in my previous life, I created the first, not created, but financed the the first company to be publicly traded in Russia as well, which is one of the largest Russian cell operators. I was involved in bringing them public, but in Ukraine, that was my main focus.
Let me clarify for everybody watching. When you say publicly traded, here in the U.S. at least, often the initials we hear related to that is, I think what you're saying is IPO, an initial public offering, correct?
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
So you were part of the first IPO in Russia, and then and then set up the first IPO in Ukraine. You're like a Wall Street legend.
Thanks God, not yet.
So this 24-hour news channel, that studio you just showed us, and that staff of people, including 30 in Russia, I want to hear more about that. But this staff of 70 people, this was all created since February 24th. And now you have me wondering, on what day did you start your first news broadcast from there?
On March 1st.
March 1st.
No,
So it took you 6 days.
There was a pilot run on the 29th, right? It was 29th days in February this year, right? So I believe that 29th was the pilot run, and on the 1st of March.
Whoop, we lost Ilya. Ilya, we lost you. Oh, there he's back. Okay.
Yeah, somebody called, so I had to cancel. Yeah.
So, had you ever done this before?
No. In general, I don't like PR stuff. I like to do things with my hands, and I was always asked by many people, why wouldn't you create your own video blog or something like that? But, no, I was actually the first Russian politician to start my Twitter. I had the first political Twitter in Russia. But nevertheless, I can spend so much time, just sitting online and chatting and do things. I like to work, so I like to do things.
So I am guessing that once this plan was hatched or conceived from February 24th, or maybe it was the 25th that it began to be discussed, to the actual launch on March 1st, did you find that because of the invasion and the urgency and the camaraderie of everyone in Ukraine, that, I mean, just buying the equipment and setting up the stage, it would take a typical company perhaps months to do that.
Yes.
You did it in 6 days.
Right. No, even less, because it's as I'm saying, 29 days in February.
4 days.
So yeah, 4 days. 4 days. Yes, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah. No, when you're focused on achieving something, that's what you do. And what we were lucky with is that many people just wanted to help us in this regards. They were basically donating us the premises, right, where to set up studios. So we didn't need to spend time on negotiating visas and stuff like that. So we got quality internet, and in 1 week it became unstable. But then Elon Musk sent us a set of Starlink equipment, so we made a backup for internet channel. Very thankful for him for that. And then we went live. We immediately were blocked by Russians on YouTube because they filed a lot of complaints. We had to go all the way up to Google top management. So they provided our YouTube channel an immunity from all those false complaints that we are obviously constantly receiving. People were ready to work at the beginning almost for free, because everybody is committed. So that was also important. But obviously, technical things, they still needed to be resolved. Equipment, broadcasting equipment, cameras, the studio itself, that was some work, but we worked around the clock, and we managed to do it. By the way, when you were advertising us very nicely, thank you for that. You were saying that we are broadcasting 24/7. Unfortunately, we are not broadcasting 24/7 because in Ukraine it's martial law, so we have curfew. And because of that, we can work right now 11 hours a day. So we are broadcasting from 11 a.m. to 21 p.m. So that's what we can do, because otherwise we just have to let people go home.
Yes.
Otherwise they would be stuck and without any possibility to go out.
And on the day that you launched, did you launch with an 11-hour schedule on the first day?
Yes.
Wow. That's going to go down in telecommunications history, what you and your team did there in really what sounds like 4 days. I do want to give a little more insight into your background, though, and hear if it helped. This is a much longer story, I know, but after you voted against the annexation of Crimea, and there may have been some other factors, you, as I understand it, you left Russia to take care of some business, personal business, for your profession, and you were not allowed to return to the country, if I understand correctly. And you were exiled and actually ended up in Silicon Valley.
It's slightly different. I was not doing something for my personal things, because as a member of parliament, we are not allowed to do this by law. But shortly before that, I represented Novosibirsk, the capital of Siberia, in Russian parliament for almost 10 years. And in 2014, I was running myself for mayor of the city. Because of this annexation of Crimea, and by vote, I had to step back from the campaign, but we consolidated around another guy who was also an opposition figure, and we managed to defeat Putin's candidate. And it's the third largest city in Russia, and we managed to take it over. And I originally had an offer to be vice mayor of the city, but I had to turn it down because, again, of this vote. I was pretty certain then the mayor would get a criminal case on him. So I was acting as an advisor to the mayor on economic affairs, economic investments, and everything, in the rank of vice mayor, but so not officially. And I was looking for investments for the city, in particular, to construct a new bridge across Ob River, which is one of the largest rivers in Siberia. And because, again, of the annexation of Crimea, I was pretty certain that the funding for that bridge would be diverted to construct a bridge to Crimea.
Yes.
And that we will be left without a bridge. I was unfortunately absolutely right. And I was actually on a business trip to find co-investors and a construction team who can bring financing with them to construct that bloody bridge. And I was on a big tour, Turkey, Europe, then US, and then Southeast Asia, was Korea and Malaysia, where I was supposed to talk to those people. And when I was in the middle of this trip in US, then this whole thing happened.
Yes. And so you're not allowed to go home.
Yes, and since that time, they just closed the border for me, and that was done on the legal grounds that they created an artificial debt, and the Russian bailiffs, they have the right to stop crossing the border for people who are indebted. Obviously, it was created not to allow people to get out, to run away with the debt, but they used it not to let me in, which is kind of ridiculous. If I'm indebted, I'm supposed to come back to repay it, but that's what they have done. And since after that, they took over all my assets that I had, and the salary in the parliament. So eventually those debt that they created was fully repaid. And when it was repaid completely, I said, so, okay, now I'm coming back. And then they made a criminal case and stripped me of parliamentary immunity and everything. I knew that it was Putin's order not to punish me but neutralize me, so
Yes.
in their perverted minds, keeping me out, that's exactly that, because I'm kind of still a free man, right? I'm not in Russian jail, I can do whatever I want, yes, they have a red warrant for Interpol on me, red notice, but the Interpol turned it down, so yeah, legally they have done what they wanted to do, but in reality, I'm a free person, and they said so. Everybody should be happy.
Yes. Well, and really, one of the reasons I ask you that is you spent how many years in Silicon Valley, and did that help you navigate the waters you had to get through very quickly to set up this studio and start broadcasting?
In the regards to the studio, no, it didn't help much. In general, yes, I did spend a year and a half then in Silicon Valley, but I had several of startups of my own in the past in the Boston area. So in general, I'm very much familiar with the investment community and in US and in other countries. That's my profession.
Yes.
That's why I'm very familiar with the high tech community. But to set up the channel, no. Firstly, it's more experience in journalism and TVs. And what was mostly helpful for me, I had a very interesting startup which I was doing in the year 2000. Actually, that was my I would say the thing that eventually persuaded me to join politics. And that was in the year 2000, I created a startup to create an interactive TV solution. Basically,
and here
for
we are,
everyone
by the way, on an interactive TV solution. So
yeah, exactly. But actually, the concept that we were thinking about at that time, it was, I would say, it was more sophisticated. I still think that it was a great idea to implement it even now. Because obviously at that time nothing like Netflix exists and everything, right. So there was a lot of video on demand there, so there was no YouTube at that time, and we were planning to install set-top boxes, which allowed people to have all this like VOD possibilities. But our core idea was to create a concept of a virtual TV channel for a person. Basically, to complement usual remote with just one extra button, which is skip. Skip.
Oh, skip.
And because our research showed that most of people, they are extremely lazy. And they still prefer, in the evening to come by a TV set, and just that they want to get the type of content that they would like to see. And the idea was that the system actually learns about the person's behavior, and with this one extra button, when he sees something that he doesn't want to see, he says, "Okay, skip it." And he does it during news broadcasts. Okay, so we don't want that piece of news. I don't want to hear about that, and the system memorizes it. When he is offered some movie, he says, "Oh, I don't want to watch this one," and then another one is being offered, until the system creates a sort of a virtual channel, which is dedicated to one particular individual. When the system guesses what the guy would like to get on his TV screen, that when he comes, he usually prefers to watch a movie, then he watches news. In the news, he is interested in, say, news about nature and about United States, but not about, say, Japan. and that's how the system works. And then we created this type of solution. Obviously, there was a lot of other stuff with interactive TV games and video on demand and whatever, but the actual core was this virtual TV channel. And my original investor was Mikhail Khodorkovsky from UCAS, but the second round investor was Ted Turner of CNN. And at that time, when I was negotiating with him in Atlanta, and then we were actually together flying back to Russia. And at that time, Putin started attacking NTV, one of our leading news stations, and Ted decided to intervene, and he got screwed and said, okay, to hell with all my investment projects in Russia. And that's how the whole thing collapsed. And that's when I decided, okay, so now it's definitely time to go into politics. I'm sorry for such a long story, but nevertheless, when I was doing that, I had a really stellar team of media guys, the most authoritative, the most well-known people in Russia were working with that project. They really liked it. The most innovative journalists were doing it with me, technicians, whatever. So my perspective on how the whole thing should work actually comes from that time. And to answer a question that one of our viewers was asking whether Ukrainian government has any input with us, no, they don't. Actually, I was asking them a lot about providing me with some content, and originally they were sending me different pieces of news from different parts of the country, and we were using them. But at the end of the day, it turns out that they have very different language there,
yes.
Which is good for Ukrainians, but which is not good for Russians.
Right.
And we had to rewrite it all the time. And so now we are producing everything on our own. We have a cooperation agreement with Deutsche Welle. And Deutsche Welle sends us some of their reports, which we are putting live. We also are cooperating with several bloggers who actually do produce certain content that we can use, that we also put in online. Sometimes we do broadcast some music, which has been produced by different musicians, and also we have a strategic cooperation agreement with it's a very well known in our part of the world documentary film festival called Art Doc Fest, and they have the top quality, festival grade documentaries, and a lot of them are connected to what's going on right now in the fields of war and in general in the society, so which has this political emphasis dimension, and we are also broadcasting them.
So you surprised me with the tour of the studio. I didn't know that was coming. I'm glad you did, by the way, because I think that's really helpful for us.
I improvised, right? So I got this.
So I'm glad you did, but I do want to get back to. So I want to wrap this up with my original question, because it's interesting. If you weren't here last week, I asked Ilya what were the top stories on his channel February morning, and I'm expecting stories about, military hardware from the US or from Europe, or, news about Putin's health, or, good news stories about Ukraine's successes on the battlefield. And no, once again, just like today, you surprising me with the studio tour, you surprised me and everybody, frankly, by saying our top story, believe it or not, was an interview with an astrologer. That completely took me by surprise. Now, I don't want to rehash that, but it just sets me up for the last question I want to ask you today before I let you go. And that is, on February morning, what are the top stories now about Putin in particular? What is it that Russians want to know about him? And what kind of information are you able to give them that is valuable and useful for them?
Look, actually, you are touching the area which is very sad for me. Because that's the nature of human perception. People like to hear what they like to hear.
Yes.
And the most popular items that we produce and where we see most of the views is not what is being with the most quality and thoughtful experts, but with those who are talking about different funny things and conspiracy theories, and who are telling people that Putin is ill and he will pass away momentarily, or in which bunker he is sitting right now, and stuff like that, which is totally irrelevant, disconnected with the reality, but that's kind of amusing for the audience. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to, like, obviously we cannot ignore what people want to hear. We cannot ignore the demand. It's about the rating and everything, but we are trying to lead the audience, not to follow the audience, but to lead the audience, and putting more serious people who are telling people the truth. Whether it is unpleasant or just not as amusing, as Putin's health and stuff like that. But that's exactly the reason why the astrologers. What I like that recently we have one of the regular guests to our channel, and his name is Dmitry Potapenko. That's the guy who is he's a small to medium size Russian entrepreneur from the real sector, not from technology and whatever. He's middle aged, and he is doing car repairs. He has some agriculture business. He has some machinery business. He has a whole lot of different unrelated businesses around him, and he is from some remote area in the country. And so he's talking about the state of Russian economy, but in general about what people in the rural areas and remote areas feel. And he's very emotional usually, and people like to watch him. And he's getting very good numbers as well, and that's very optimistic because this guy is not bullshitting, but he's talking about real life, but just he's doing it so emotionally and express himself so nicely that people like to watch. To Jody, your question, I think I just answered.
You did. I think maybe Jody lost. Yeah, maybe we lost her for a few minutes there. Jody, Jody, by the way, is my wife. Full disclosure, Jody, you can go back to sometime today or tonight. The show will be archived, and you can go see Ilya's answer to that. It's really helpful for us to hear, like what you just said about what people are interested in watching on February morning. It's a window into the soul of, I'd like to think it's a window into the soul of an average or typical Russian. And frankly, here in the US, it's hard for us to understand what the average Russian is like, and particularly what they're thinking during this war. And I think it's brilliant of you to mix both the hard news that is important for them to hear with things like astrologers and music, because if you hammer at them with the hard news all the time, they're probably not going to come back. But if you entertain, maybe a little dancing bear at a circus or something, and then some hard news, it probably makes it more palatable.
Greg, the simplest answer to that question, I think that the average Russian is very much like average American. Actually, average Russian is way much closer to the average American than to average European. He is very individualistic. He distrusts the government. He feels more oppressed He does not see as many opportunities that in general exist with American culture, but his overarching dream is absolutely the same. This classical American dream of self-made people is exactly what the dream of the average Russian. It's there's a Russian phrase which is now fairy tales, and that's kind of what is the quintessential dream of all Russians. It's being translated literally. It's from dust into dukes, из грязи в князи. So that's and that's what people mean. Our main character in the fairy tales is the guy whom everybody is calling the fool, which is sitting in his house, and then at some point he awakes and becomes, again, in the modern terms, the great entrepreneur who makes the inventions, and because of this fool becomes, husband of the Tsar's daughter, or any other way famous. But he's being promoted, being a poor guy, by his invention, by his creativity, and that's very much different from the European tales. So he's not tricking anyone. He's been driven by entrepreneurial spirits, and I think that makes us very much the same, in Americans also a lot of prejudice sometimes, there are people who are very arrogant and ignorant of what's going on around. It's a great country, large country. Russia is the same. Yes. As a country in general, Russians have the same mission in life like Americans. Americans like to spread democracy even against people's wills, and then Russians do the same. Just we call it not democracy but freedom. But yes. It's this mission in the nation is exactly the same.
And I think for many Americans, hearing you describe the similarities between Russians and Americans like that, it's a bit surprising to me. It's not what I would have expected you to say, but I find it both hopeful and refreshing. Because right now there's, the situation is not hopeful and refreshing. But, we can only hope that the will of the people will ultimately win the day.
Well, that's absolutely true, and people are tricked right now. But I saw many cases when Americans were tricked as well. Yes. And just that you have a lot of means to wake up, and you can be tricked for sometimes, for yes. certain time, but then you wake up. And Russians will as well, but it would just take certain extra time because all those means of communication are so limited, and that's why we are doing all these things with Ultrafibrotic.
Yeah, we're over time now. I'm going to let you go. You can click the end button and check out anytime you want. And I want to repost the links to Ilya's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Agnes is asking whether Russians whether Americans think that the government always behaves by law and Russians do not. I don't see any real difference here, because I think that the average American actually fundamentally distrusts the government in the same fashion as Russians do. It's just that the difference is that in the United States there is a court who is supposed to fix things, and in Russia there is no. And so in America there is this ultimate arbiter, which impersonates the system of checks and balances, when that's the ultimate refugee for an average person. But I wouldn't say that the attitude towards the government is fundamentally different. And in regards to freedom of speech, again, there is true freedom of speech and there is an image of freedom of speech. I think that the state of Russian media was deteriorating a lot over recent years, but I think that in the United States, freedom of speech also was on the decline in recent years. And I think it was actually happening very much in the same fashion as it was happening in Russia. I many times told this to American journalists, and they were always displeased with my assessment. But I saw this all in the 90s in Russia. In 90s in Russia was, you know, whatever freedom of speech you can think about. But in the middle of 90s, when there were elections of Yeltsin versus Zyuganov, so like a reformer against the communist, a lot of journalists they basically betrayed the values of freedom of speech. They decided that they would not tell the truth and they would not be the objective people, but they would actually promote one candidate against another just because they didn't want the communists to come back. And what I see right now in US is exactly the same, you know, because I see the quality of information that is being broadcast by CNN, New York Times, and Washington Post declined a lot recently. And also it was very much politically motivated with the best intentions of the journalists, but nevertheless, it was not them who started this. I think it was rather Fox which started the same unobjective approach. But at the end of the day, what we see is two camps, and none of those camps follow the standards of the objective journalism.
I think it's a longer conversation and a good one because I also want to just bring up and maybe we'll take this up next week. And it's interesting that it's Agnieszka who's raising these questions because I spent a lot of time with her in Poland a month ago. And one of the things she made me aware of is that in a country like Poland, there is not what is called the rule of law. And I'm guessing without having Googled it, that the rule of law does not apply in Russia as well.
Definitely. That's a very large problem in Russia, but it's not the origin of the problem; it's the consequence of the problem, and that we should keep in mind.
Yes, exactly. All right, I'm going to let you go, Ilya. I'm going to, and Agnieszka, thank you for your questions. Jody, thank you for your question. I'm going to paste the links in for February morning in Russian and the Telegram newsfeed. And the third link I'm going to post in is for the Bravery Foundation. We didn't talk about it today, but just know that this is a foundation that Ilya is involved with that is raising money to help Russians who are in Russia. And tell me if I get this right, Ilya. There are people in Russia whose jobs require them to support the war, even though they don't personally support the war. And the Bravery Foundation is helping them either by extracting them out of the country or paying their legal bills. Am I close on that?
Yeah, that's you are exactly on target. Those whom we need to save after they dared to stand against the war, that's basically what we are doing.
Yeah, and it's an important job, and in fact, I think we should talk about it next week so people understand why it's so important to support people who perhaps are. Well, there's a case, and I was going to ask you about this today, but we started talking about other things. There was a story in the Washington Post. In fact, I'll put the link here about a woman that the Bravery Foundation helped, and I think people will remember she was the woman who early on after the invasion worked at a Russian TV news network, and she stood behind the anchor with a sign that basically said, "They're lying to you. Don't believe the propaganda." And a lot of people were upset with her and not willing to forgive her for the work she did as a journalist before that happened, instead of recognizing how brave and essential it was for her to do that kind of work and make it safe for other people to stand up and speak out as well.
Yeah, it's a big problem. We have a lot of debate about her here in Ukraine and in general social networks. A lot of people are not ready to forgive her, but I think it is a mistake. And she is now paying very high price. She may have her parents' rights revoked from her. because her former husband and also on Putin's side, and he has now filed a lawsuit against her in this regards that she's a bad mother. She was given a job by the same Deutsche Welle that I was referring to, which we are working with, but it's a big scandal, and she tried to get to Ukraine, and she was denied to. And the former Minister of Culture, who is the former boss of the large Ukrainian TV station, actually said like we shouldn't allow her here because she was working for such a long time for state propaganda, and she was quiet. And she was saying, but I am half Ukrainian ethnically, and by law in Ukraine, it's like in Israel, if you have Ukrainian roots and you can prove them, you are eligible to get the citizenship no matter what. So it's a whole mess right now around her, and it's a big discussion.
Yeah. Well, let's continue that conversation next week. Thank you for being here. This was really fantastic, fantastic conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.